My son hadn't answered his phone in 14 days, and that is not the kind of silence a mother learns to live with. By the time the bus rolled south into Denver and let me off under a bruised sky, I had played and replayed every possible excuse for him until none of them felt like anything but lies I was telling myself. I walked the last few blocks to Maple Street with my hand clenched around the spare key that lives in my purse, though I didn't end up needing it. The door to Josh's little blue house wasn't latched. Cold air lifted the hallway runner. A smell I couldn't name. Old cocoa, something damp, hung in the entry. I said his name once, and then again, because in a quiet house you always try twice. No answer. The living room wasn't destroyed, not the way you see on television, but it was wrong. The couch had been dragged crooked. One picture frame lay face down, and a mug on the coffee table had grown a thin, dark skin. Rock salt, the kind he scattered on the back stoop when it iced, was tracked across the rug like he'd tried to fix a slip and never finished. I put my palm on the back of the couch to steady myself and felt the faint hum of the furnace kick on. Heat working in the belly of a house that was trying, God love it, to pretend everything was normal. "Josh," I called, louder now. The kitchen had a water glass tipped on its side, a small dried crescent of tea on the counter. A chair scraped crooked against the tile as if someone got up fast. My heart was already beating in my throat when I took the stairs, counting each step because that is how you pace panic. Numbers and breath. At the top of the landing, a nightlight glowed in Leah's room. Josh had found it at a craft fair last spring, an enamel fox with eyes that shone a gentle amber. I stood with my fingers resting on the doorknob and had the ridiculous thought that if I turned it too quickly, the room would shatter. When I went in, everything looked arranged for sleep. The bed made, the little desk stacked with crayons and spiral notebooks, the stuffed animals lined up along the window seat. I crossed to the bed and ran my hand across the quilt automatically, straightening a wrinkle that didn't exist. Then I heard it. A small, stubborn knocking from inside the wood. Not the door, not the window. A dull, soft tap-tap from underneath. "Leah?" My voice came out like I hadn't used it in weeks. Josh had built a platform bed with drawers under it to save space. The knocks came again, slow and patient, and I had a picture in my mind of a tiny fist, remembering what knocking is. I backed away, pulled out my phone, and stared at the keypad for a second longer than I should have, because none of us wants to believe we've arrived at the kind of moment where you need help. I called anyway. "My son," I said when the dispatcher answered. "My son's house is open, and my granddaughter, I think she's under the bed. I can hear her knocking. Please hurry." They did. 2 officers, one of them a woman with calm eyes who introduced herself as Officer Brooks, came up the stairs with a quiet practice speed that made me want to cry with relief. "We're going to take a look," she said, gentle and firm. The male officer crouched, slid a pry bar under the trim of the platform, and levered. The drawer shuddered once, stuck, and then popped with a small, ugly sound. She was curled inside, blanket, bottle, hair matted to her forehead with sweat. Leah. She looked at me without seeing me, eyes too wide and dry, the way eyes get when tears have run out. The plastic water bottle under her hand was flattened like a talisman. "Baby," I said, and my knees lost language. They scooped her up and carried her down the stairs while I followed the shape of my family into the winter air. The ambulance doors closed, and I climbed in beside her. You would not believe how loud a siren sounds when you're not ready for it, how it makes the whole world feel like it's shuddering. In the emergency room, fluorescent lights make everybody look like worry. A doctor named Paige Monroe said words that had edges: dehydration, ketones, acute stress response, and threaded a line into a vein ghosting under Leah's pale skin. Her fingers twitched when the tape went down. I took her hand and put it against my cheek and told her it was me, Grandma, and that I was here. She blinked once, slow as if surfacing, and then stared past me at a place I couldn't reach. A detective arrived while the nurse adjusted the IV. She had a notebook and the kind of patience that frightens liars. "I'm Detective Rosa Delgado," she said. "Miss Harper?" "Yes," I said, and my voice did not sound like mine. "Tell me the last time you heard from your son." 2 weeks, I cleared my throat. We talk once a week at least. His texts went green. I called his work and he'd taken a few shifts off. I told myself he was catching up on sleep. I told myself stupid things. We'll start at the house. Any neighbors who know everybody's schedule? Who notice too much? Mr. Whitaker, I said, across the street. Hal. He has a Ring camera and a porch chair he never leaves. Delgado nodded, jotting, and then tapped the notebook shut. I'll have a team secure the property. Please stay with your granddaughter. If she says anything at all, call me, even drawings. I don't scare easy. I spent 40 years on an oncology floor, and there isn't much panic left in me. But that evening, I felt like a paper bag somebody had breathed through too many times. I watched Leah's chest rise and fall and counted breaths instead of minutes. When I finally stepped into the hallway to make a call to my sister, 2 states away and useless except to answer a phone, I saw Detective Delgado again, already heading back toward Maple Street. She stopped long enough to put a card into my hand. We'll knock, she said. We'll keep knocking. Hal Whitaker opened his door before I could lift my hand. Been waiting on y'all, he rasped, already motioning us in. Detective Delgado stood in his den like she'd been there 100 times, polite but attention-snagging on the little details the way cops do. Hal's place smelled like coffee and a lifetime of cable news. He had his laptop in his lap, a tangle of cords at his feet, and a gleam in his eye I recognized. The satisfaction of a man who has something to show. Storm night, he said, tapping at the timeline on his Ring dashboard. Wind knocked half the trash down the cul-de-sac and set the chimes going on every porch. About 1:47 in the morning. This. On his screen, a box truck nosed into view. No logos, just a strip of reflective tape along the side that flashed when a car went by at the corner. It idled by Josh's driveway with its high beams off, the running lights looking like eyelids half closed. 2 figures. One was tall in a long coat, the other shorter and blocky, hood up. The tall one carried something rolled. At first glance, you might think tarp, but the proportions weren't right. More like a long, heavy tube. Listen, Hal said, sliding the volume up. The tiny mic on his doorbell caught a clatter. Metal on metal, hollow, like a tool dropped into a large, empty can. Detective Delgado leaned forward, thumb on the spacebar. She paused the frame and pointed at the side panel. See that dent? She said to me, though I wasn't sure she wanted my eyes so much as she wanted to make sure she'd seen it. Shaped like a crescent moon. She took a photo of the screen. Miss Harper, has your son had any work done at the house recently? Contractors? Deliveries? He pulled a permit for a porch railing, I said. He built it himself. He joked the city cared more about rail height than crime. Hal snorted. Those boys aren't rail guys. Delgado's phone vibrated once. She stepped aside, answered, listened, then nodded. We've got partial plates from a traffic cam 2 blocks over, she said when she came back into Hal's warm den. Same truck, same dent. Mr. Whitaker, can we get copies? You bet you can, Hal said, proud as he'd ever be of anything. We didn't need my spare key when we returned to Josh's. The front door was still, horribly, politely ajar. The detective put gloves on before she touched anything. In Josh's small office, she clicked on a pen light not for drama but to help her eyes search detail. My son kept his life in folders. EMTs do that, color-coded tabs, labels typed straight. He liked to pretend chaos could be tamed if you kept the labels neat. Bills, bank statements. A yellow folder stamped with a sticky note that said, County Records. Inside were photocopies of a quit claim deed template. Blank, as if someone had shoved it in his face to show how easy giving up could be, and a single post-it in my son's handwriting. Travis, no go, not signing, stop showing up. Who's Travis? Delgado asked. A guy who calls himself an investor, I said. He left cards under the mat. We buy houses as is, fast cash. Josh told him no more than once. I saw the cards. I threw one out myself. Another folder held emails printed out like evidence in a private trial. Permit clarification, inspection revisit, friendly reminder. Different senders, same pushy politeness that makes you feel bad for adhering to the law. A name came up 3 times, Mara Sloan. Permit runner, the detective murmured, more to herself than to me. She turned the pages carefully, and I watched the anger click like a thermostat inside her chest when she reached a letter that looked official until you loved it with your eyes. The seal was low resolution. The margins were wrong by a finger's width. "Dear Mr. Harper," it read, "failure to remediate porch encroachment may result in fines or legal action." It wasn't from anyone. It was from whoever had a printer and a mean idea. "They squeezed him," Delgado said. "Paper first, then in person." I picked up a photo from the desk. Leah on the porch, one knee green from grass, Josh behind her, sawdust bright on his forearms. He'd braced that railing with his own hands. I stood there with the photo in my fingers until my phone buzzed. The hospital. "Grandma?" a small voice said, the smallest voice. "Leah." "I'm here," I told her, even though I wasn't, not yet. "I'm here, baby, I'm coming." When I reached her bedside, her fingers smelled like hand sanitizer and crayon wax. Leah would not look directly at me, but she pressed a drawing into my hand with such purpose that I held my breath while I unfolded it. Kids draw with honesty. Their lies are clumsy. Their truths are unmissable. She had drawn the porch. 2 men. One with a mark under his left ear. Only a gray smudge, but her smudges are careful. The other wore a jacket with a sticker. A circle with a star inside. A truck behind them with a side panel dented into a crescent. And under the boards of the porch, a little animal curled tight. It took me a second to realize the animal was a child with a ponytail. "Did Daddy put you there?" I said. Her chin dipped once. "Did he give you a password?" She tapped her finger twice softly on the blanket. Knock, knock. I knew now what I had heard under the wood. Detective Delgado photographed the drawing like it was a relic. Her phone rang again while she was slipping the paper into a sleeve, and when she stepped into the hall to answer, I held Leah and let my mind run to the worst place. Because sometimes you have to look at a thing honestly before you can back away from it. When Delgado came back in, she carried that weathered look cops get when they stop being polite inside their bones. "The truck is registered to a shell," she said, "but the crescent dent gave us 2 hits on stoplight cameras. Parked behind a hardware store off Federal. Guess who rents an office above it?" I didn't guess, but she said the name anyway. Travis Kincaid. Something inside me that had been trembling found steel. I had not been a fool to worry. I had been a fool to wait. The back of the hardware store smelled like lumber and damp plaster. The squad car slid past the dumpsters to a loading dock where the truck had slept under cameras. There, leaned against the wall, was a tube like the one in Hal's video. Up close, it wasn't a tarp. It was a commercial mailing tube, 8 feet long, scarred and dusted with drywall. The cap was loose. Detective Delgado pulled it off and slid out a rolled vinyl banner. Kincaid Redevelopment, it said in big letters with a logo that believed itself. Below that was a cheerful artist's rendering of Josh's block, with Josh's house darkened and labeled Phase 1. They photographed it, bagged it, logged it as if it were a living thing. An officer waved from inside the dock door, holding up a key on a ring. The tag said, Sloan. We followed that key into a storage facility that was a labyrinth of roll-up doors and quiet. The unit Morales unlocked, Delgado had called for a warrant on the way, held printers, a laminator, boxes of forged letterhead that looked almost right if you didn't love paper the way bureaucrats do. There was a corkboard on one wall with permit pull sheets, inspection calendars, names and addresses thumbtacked in tidy rows. Josh's address appeared in red ink circled twice. There was also a chest freezer in the corner. The lid had a fur of frost. We stood around it with breath we didn't want and opened it like we were looking under the bed again. Paint rollers, drop cloths, a bag of ice melt, nothing that steals your life. I let out a sound I didn't know lived inside me. Relief twisted into dread like a rope. If not here, then where? We did not find Josh that day. We found enough paper to choke a courthouse and enough arrogance to build a tower out of. Detective Delgado told me some people hide their crimes by pretending to be exactly the kind of people who do paperwork. They make a letter that looks like a letter and a schedule that looks like a schedule, she said, and then they push. If a person doesn't break, they push at night. I had wanted to be wrong about everything. Standing in that storage unit, I wanted instead to be very right and for that rightness to matter. Denver has retention ponds that pretend to be lakes 4 months a year and mud bowls the rest. A plow operator, the kind of man who sees things the city doesn't want to admit it has, had called in a tip about a box truck at dawn by the pond off 56th, the week after the storm. We reached the fence as the dive team was roping off the water, their breath making little clouds in the air that drifted away like ideas. If you're listening to me now, and you've stuck with me this far, I want you to do one small thing for me. Tell me where you are. I am one woman with one voice, and I don't know how far a voice can reach unless somebody answers. And if you think that sounds like a plea to a camera, maybe it is, but I'm allowed my small asks after what it took to keep walking. They found my son tangled in cattail roots 9 feet down. I will not spend your patience on details we do not need, except to say that water takes what it can and the rest is left for people like me to name. At the coroner's office, a man with kind hands asked if I was ready, and I told him no, and told him yes, because readiness is a word for calendars, not for mothers. They lifted a sheet, and there he was. He had a bruise on his cheek shaped like a man's ring and a cut at his temple, like the corner of porch wood and a line at his mouth. You get when you are about to say one last word. Run. That's the word I want to believe it was. Trauma and water, the medical examiner said. Those were the words I filed behind paperwork that would never end. It is a strange thing to say, but grief did me a favor. It cut out fear and left only function. Detective Delgado moved faster after that because we had work to do that was shaped like justice. She set a meeting with Kincaid, and he arrived with oatmeal-colored confidence and a smile he probably wore when he stood in front of ribbon cuttings. We laid out a small portion of what we had. The banner with Phase 1 arrowed at my son's house, the forged letters that pretended to be law, the storage key with his runner's name on the tag, the stoplight camera clips, the photo of the crescent dent, and Leah's drawing. Her brave little lines marking a scar under a man's ear and a star in a circle on a jacket and the curve of a dent in a truck. He kept to a script men like that depend on. We're community stewards, he said. We buy distressed assets. We improve neighborhoods. If Mr. Harper interacted with an independent contractor, we can't possibly... Detective Delgado hit play on a clip scraped from a driveway mic 2 houses down from Hal's porch. Static, wind, then 2 words, flat and ugly. Just sign. Silence. Shove him. Kincaid blanched. The pause before a lie is always a little too long. He reached for words like safe harbor, unfortunate, tragic, misunderstanding, and found they didn't float. We didn't have a confession. We had something heavier, a net. And we had one more thread to pull. Delgado wired a bait house 3 blocks away and had a young couple sit at their kitchen table pretending to be nervous. First-time buyers worried about inspections and fees. Mara Sloan arrived with a folder of fresh letterhead and a round seal that didn't sit quite right on the paper, like a bad tooth in a mouth that otherwise smiles fine. In the next room, headphones captured a blueprint spoken out loud. If they won't sign, Mara said, tapping with her pen, we lean on code. Unpermitted this. Safety that. We have a guy who can talk to people. Sometimes they change their minds. She said the word phase in Kincaid's name and the address of a house that isn't mine to tell you about because those people are living their lives and deserve quiet. But the important thing is she put the lean into a sentence where it made itself a verb. She made it plain how they pressure people until the people break. When people don't break, they shove. They took her at dusk in the numb light that comes between working hours and dinner. Officers cuffed Kincaid in front of his office above the hardware store. Hal filmed from his porch like a citizen of a place, taking back a little dignity. He sent me the clip with a single line. For Josh. The court did what courts do when the prosecutor's paper matches the shape of truth. They called it enterprise and predication and conspiracy to commit fraud, and then they added the word that knits all the others together. Homicide. The defense called it an unfortunate accident, a shove that found a corner. The jury looked at Leah's drawing, and they looked at the banner, and they looked at the forged letters and the big man with the clean jacket, and they listened to 2 words captured by a small microphone that no one knew was there. Jurors believe engineers, and they believe kids. Kids don't draw what they don't see. Mara talked first, because that is how people like Mara save the little that can be saved. She mapped the flow, threatening letter on almost official paper, drop-in inspection talk that wasn't honest, after-hours visit with a tube that rolled a banner and God knows what else, pressure on the porch, a fall that wasn't an accident, a truck by a pond before sunrise. Kincaid stared straight ahead and tried to wear a face that meant something noble. It did not fit. The verdict came on a Friday that smelled like thaw, guilty on all counts. The judge's voice had iron under velvet when she sentenced them to the kind of arithmetic that adds up to the rest of a man's life. I held Leah's hand in the gallery and she squeezed twice. Our old small code, knock knock, the password that meant we were here and we were together and we could knock back now. I will tell you something that might not make sense if you haven't lived it. We did not go back to Maple Street right away. Houses are bones, and families are the marrow, and sometimes you have to let the marrow rest somewhere quiet while the bones heal. I took Leah north to Greeley, where the wind smells like sugar beets, and the night is clean enough to sleep in. Therapy will teach us new passwords. We'll put a railing on a porch again someday, and we'll get it level, and somebody will smile about it, and I will say my son's name out loud in broad light. In the mornings now, Leah puts her drawings on my refrigerator. They are full of sun and dogs and a little fox lamp that looks exactly like the one that sits by her bed. Sometimes she draws a house with a porch and 2 figures on it. When she does, she adds a third, smaller person at the railing, a neighbor with a beard and a coffee cup, because Hal belongs in our little town of paper people too. On certain afternoons when the air is so still it feels like something is holding its breath, I can hear a woodpecker a block over, tap-tapping a tree, and though my body still goes stiff for a second, it does not feel like fear anymore. The sound is just the sound. The reverberation is mine. The paperwork didn't end, of course. Paperwork never ends. Insurance, estate, the title company, a parade of people whose jobs are to put words next to other words in a way that makes the world behave. I learned more about deeds than anybody should have to. I learned how easy it is for a letter that looks almost right to make a man doubt what he knows. There is something low and mean in exploiting a person's desire to do things properly. There is, too, something decent and fierce in a neighborhood that refuses to make itself small for bullies. I called the county clerk one afternoon and asked what someone should do if they ever got a letter like the ones in that unit. "Call us," she said. "Ask. Don't be ashamed not to know." She sounded tired and kind, 2 qualities I trust in any voice. "Scared people sign fast," she added. "We want them to slow down." I have learned to slow down, and I have learned to move fast. Slow is for tea in the morning, for the way Leah presses into my side when we read, for watching her breathe in a room where light comes thin and blue through the blinds. Fast is for doors that aren't latched when they should be, for phones that ring and ring, for knocks that don't make sense. If you're still with me, I am going to ask you again. Tell me where you are. Write it down so I can see the map of this story. I don't need your last name or your street or the color of your house. I just need to know where my voice landed, not because reach itself is anything to brag about, but because when people put their little pins in a map, they make a shape nobody can ignore. If my story reached you in Boise or Biloxi or a town with a name so pretty you don't want to share it, put it down anyway. Let some other grandmother see that pin and think, I am not alone. That is the only thing I've ever needed most. Sometimes I tell this whole story out loud, the way I'm telling it to you now, and I hear myself switch tenses when I get to the part with the porch. My grammar breaks because time breaks there. In my memory, I am on the stairs, and I am at the bed, and I am at the hospital, and I am holding a picture of a drawing that a child made to pull herself back to us. I have never been more grateful for crayons and a small mind's relentless insistence on order. When I put Leah to bed now, I lay my ear near the platform and tap twice on the wood. She taps back, already half asleep. The house holds the sound for us and carries it, and it feels, every time, like prayer. There are nights when I drive to the pond. The city has cleared some brush and put up a taller fence and a sign that uses words like safety and do not enter, and violators will be prosecuted. I park anyway and stand in the wide quiet. Trucks roar by on the road in the near distance, and their sound lays over the water like a rumble. The cattails move a little when the wind remembers to blow. I say my son's name there in the open air, where the sky above is too big to keep anything in. The first time I did it, I expected thunder. I got meadowlarks the next morning instead. That is how the world answers sometimes. Forgive it for not being theatrical on your behalf. On Sundays, when the sun comes in just right and my hands feel good, I bake. I have been making cornbread since I was a girl, and my son always liked it with too much honey, the way kids do. Leah prefers it with butter and a little sprinkle of salt on top. We eat it at the kitchen table with our elbows planted like flags. When we are finished, I wrap 2 pieces in foil and write Hal on the top with a Sharpie, and we walk them across the street to our neighbor who once taught me how to pull video from a tiny doorbell, like he was teaching me to read. I know now that we have to feed the people who help us see. If I have any wisdom to put into the world after all this, it isn't complicated. Do not be embarrassed not to know. If a letter says something and your stomach says something else, call. Ask for a second voice. Do not sign because you want quiet. Quiet that is bought with fear is not quiet. Do not open your door to anyone who trades on urgency and shame. There are people whose job is to make you feel small about the rules. You are not small. The rules, when they are the honest ones, are there to keep people like you in your house, on your porch, in your life. I drove past Maple Street last week. The house is still blue. The winter wreath that someone, maybe a neighbor, maybe a city worker with a soft spot, hung on the porch looks a little tired now that spring is nosing in. The rail Josh built is still straight, a simple level line drawn across the front of his life. I parked and sat with my hands on the wheel until I had the courage to open the door. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I stood on the sidewalk and watched a sparrow hop from post to post, neat as punctuation. When I left, I touched the wood just to feel the warmth in it. We were not a family that got everything right. None of us are. We were a family that tried to make things sound. And if you could run your hand across the porch rail he made and feel the smoothness where he sanded it 3 times when 2 would have done, you would know him the way I do. Leah asked me last night why I tell this story to people I cannot see. Does it help, she said, skeptical in the way smart 8-year-olds are. It helps in the way a porch light helps, I told her. It doesn't fix the dark. It makes a place where you can see to put your foot. She thought about that for as long as she ever thinks about anything without drawing it. Then tell it, she said. Tell it until you don't have to anymore. So I am telling it, and I am asking you for the smallest favor. If this story found you, let me know where you were. Write it down so I can trace the shape of how far a small voice can travel. If you know somebody who needs to hear the part where a grandmother didn't stop knocking, send this to them and tell them to borrow whatever courage I have left. We can return it together when they don't need it anymore. Sometimes I take Leah's hand and we stand in the doorway and I say, "Ready?" And she says, "Ready." And we knock twice on the wood before we go out into the day. It is our way of saying we remember. It is our way of saying that the house listens, and that we are still here, and that if we ever hear a small sound from under the boards again, we will answer with both of our hands.